So you're trying to soundproof this noise. Usually it can get quite expensive if you're trying to soundproof a ceiling or floor because it requires you sometimes to rip out the ceiling, add a bunch of stuff in between the cavities inside your ceiling, and it can get quite expensive. But a lot of those methods do work. However, there are some cheap, effective ways that you can start by doing to soundproof your ceiling or the floor if you can access that area. If you own the home and you can access the second floor, then start there, start with the floor. But if you can't access, then you'll need to start with the ceiling. Now, we won't be ripping out any drywall in this video. It'll just be a lot more basic and stuff that you can do DIY. Also, things that are more on budget. I did a video a few weeks ago on the cheapest ways to soundproof a room, and some people in the comment sections, rightfully so, were asking, well, what about the floor and the ceiling? You didn't really touch too much on that, and that's what we'll talk about in this video. Now, there's two different types of noise, and hopefully the one that you're trying to soundproof is the noise which is airborne noise, which is people talking, listening to music without too much bass, of course, or TV. That's airborne noise. But structural noise is usually probably why you're here. The footsteps, the vibrational noise that goes through, that's a little bit more difficult to soundproof, and using different types of materials for the different types of noise that you encounter, because it's usually not a one-size-fits-all, especially for structural noise and airborne noise especially. Let's start in this room. You have a ceiling that you want to soundproof. Well, usually when I'm talking about soundproofing a room, I always start with seal all the gaps and the cracks, because typically if there's an opening of just 1% of the wall or the ceiling, well, it lets about 10% of the noise back in, typically. We want to seal all those gaps, especially for airborne noise. Now, usually there's gaps around electrical outlets and light switches, but one thing that people might not really think of is on the ceilings, all your light fixtures and your air vents, if you open those up, you might see quite a gap between the electrical box. You won't be able to get into behind the electrical box because you don't want to rip out the drywall, which is understandable. So we can't really add anything to block all those holes. But let's say your ceiling is open and you can get behind those electrical boxes where the light fixture sits, then you could add some putty pad. As you can see on your screen, there's a lot of holes on those electrical boxes. Well, all those holes should be sealed because noise will go right through those holes, and that's where some of the noise is coming from. You can use putty pads to seal all those holes, but if you can't get behind the electrical boxes, then using something like acoustical sealant around where the drywall meets the electrical box, seal that up, and that will work to block some of the noise coming through. But since this is a video about cheaper budget ways, we want to skip the acoustical caulking, because one thing that you would notice is when you look online and you see something, a product, or even a business that promotes acoustical or sound deadening, usually those materials will be more expensive because of what it can do, what they promise of what it can do. But there are alternative products out there, if you look, and I have, that basically will get you the same results at a fraction of the price. Now, one thing that you can use instead of acoustical caulking is just use Red Devil caulking. Now, usually the difference between regular caulking and acoustical caulking is that acoustical caulking will stay rubbery over time. So with all the vibrations of that footstep noise, it will cause cracks in the caulking, and well, noise will start seeping through those cracks. Acoustical caulking, or Red Devil caulking, which is a fraction of the price as some acoustical caulking, will also not crack over time, and they are guaranteed to not dry up and not crack for the lifetime that it's up there. So that's pretty good. So start there, seal those gaps, and now time to add another layer of drywall on the ceiling. But before doing that, now I know you might think that how am I going to add another layer of drywall on the ceiling? It's not that easy, but it is that easy. You can get well, just look on your screen. You can get this type of apparatus to basically add the drywall for you. You can buy this for a few $100s, or, and I'll have a link in the description below, but what I'll actually advise you to do is just go to your local hardware store and ask them to buy a tool to install drywall on the ceiling, and they'll know exactly what you're talking about. And you can rent it for not very much money, and then you can bring it home, add a layer of drywall onto the ceiling, and before doing that, however, you'll want to add a layer of something called mass-loaded vinyl. Now mass-loaded vinyl, the technical term is a thin rubber sheeting impregnated or sometimes impregnated with metal particles to make it even heavier and able to block more noise. Now mass-loaded vinyl is quite heavy because it comes in a roll, and each square foot of this stuff is either 1 or 2 pounds. I would recommend buy the 2 pounds mass-loaded vinyl. You'll get more bang for your buck and it'll block and stop more noise. The thing with mass-loaded vinyl, which is good, is that it does not only block airborne noise, but it also helps reduce structural noise, which is the footsteps that you're trying to get rid of. This type of material is not as expensive if you buy it in bulk, but if you buy it in bulk, the roll just gets to your house and it's just a bigger roll that will cost you hundreds of dollars. So just measure how much you need and just buy what you need and don't buy any more. After you've added your mass-loaded vinyl onto the ceiling, get your Red Devil caulking and cover that seam in between each layer of mass-loaded vinyl. You should be good to go to add your next layer of drywall, which you'll want to add a 5/8 inch drywall, not a 1/2 inch drywall, because it'll stop a little bit more noise and it's just a little bit more money, not that much. But usually on a ceiling, a lot of places they add 5/8 inch drywall anyway because it's sturdier and it'll prevent bowing a lot more than 1/2 inch drywall. Now after all of this, you should notice quite a noise reduction coming from upstairs. Now that is if you can't access the upstairs. If you can go and access the upstairs and you don't really want to add more drywall or you don't want to get into that, it's a lot easier to go upstairs and work on the floor than rip out drywall onto the ceiling. Now that you're upstairs, if you have hardwood floors, there's not much that you can do because you can add carpeting on the hardwood floor, but usually you don't really want to hide nice wood floors. So the only thing that you can really do for wood floors is to add an area rug. Now if you did buy some mass-loaded vinyl, you can add the mass-loaded vinyl under the area rug to add a lot more cushioning on every footstep that will be walking over it. Now if you have carpet, you have a little bit more to play with because you can remove the carpet and then reinstall the carpet after. Now you have two different types of soundproofing material here for two different types of noise. You can either use the mass-loaded vinyl for the structural noise and airborne noise. If you're only trying to soundproof for the footsteps and adding a cork underlayment underneath the carpet, and it is less expensive than mass-loaded vinyl. Now, if you're trying to soundproof for both footsteps and airborne noise, then adding mass-loaded vinyl will be the better choice, but it is a little bit more expensive than the cork. And then, what do? Put your carpet. It's all hidden. It's under the floor. And you'll get some results, and you won't have to rip out the ceiling or rip out anything else. And it's not as difficult as you might expect. Now, if you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and go check out my website, soundproofguide.com. I'll have a link below, and thank you very much for watching. Until next time.